Hello and welcome to another edition of Prescott Talks. My name is Jim Dutton. I'm the president of Conservatives for a Constitutional Republic here in Yavapai County and your guest host for this episode. I have with me our special guest, Steve Zipperman, who is currently a member at large representing CD2 on the Arizona State Republican Executive Committee. And Steve also has a passion for helping people understand the United States Constitution as well as the Arizona Constitution. And we're going to kind of focus on the Arizona Constitution for a few minutes here. And so, Steve, welcome aboard. And why don't you tell folks a little bit about yourself?
Well, thank you, Jim. My background is that I owned a Century 21 office selling real estate since 1983. And then I went to law school. And I worked my way through law school in the hardcore gang unit of the Los Angeles District Attorney's Office and did a little criminal work there. Once I graduated, I passed the bar in California, and I practiced law for just under 30 years. Most of what I did was real estate, business, and a little bit of anything else that came in. I did some medical malpractice work as well. Mm-hmm. So defending hospitals and doctors against malpractice suits. Mm-hmm.
Well, how would you rate your knowledge on the United States Constitution and the Arizona Constitution?
Well, I don't think anyone can really call themselves an expert, because no matter how much you know, there's always something that you didn't know, something that you overlooked, something that you interpreted the wrong way. Mm-hmm. And as the Supreme Court keeps making new rulings about the United States Constitution, of course, those rules change. But I know quite a bit about the U.S. Constitution, and I was very curious about the Arizona Constitution. I came here as a political refugee, and I watched them destroy California, and I definitely don't want that to happen here. I know how they took over California. It was horrible to be there under those circumstances, and I will, with my last breath, work to prevent that from ever happening here.
Well, that's good to know. Now, we know, most Americans know, that the United States Constitution is the supreme law of our nation. How does the role of the Arizona Constitution fit into that type of a scheme?
Well, the Arizona Constitution is very consistent with the United States Constitution. Of course, where they conflict, the U.S. Constitution is in charge because it's the supreme law of the land. But the Arizona Constitution fills in a lot of places where the U.S. Constitution doesn't. For example, the United States Constitution doesn't have a right to privacy. But here in Arizona, our Constitution gives the people a right to privacy, and we can cite to the Constitution to protect that right. Hmm. So there are some other areas, Second Amendment, the United States Constitution is a little vague as to exactly what the limits are. Arizona's expanded on that because it can, and has included a lot more protections for firearms owners.
Well, that's good to know. Yeah. Let me ask you this, too. Is either one of these constitutions a provision in either one of them for what we call executive orders, where a governor will just decide that they can shut down businesses, keep businesses open, limit your travel, your association, your group sizes? Either Constitution have any provision for that?
Well, you have executive orders on the federal level and on the state level. And that's where the executive, either the president or the governor, decides that the legislature has failed to do their job. And both the United States Constitution and the Arizona Constitution have a distinct separation of powers where no branch is supposed to do the work of the others. But the executive here in Arizona, the governor, makes executive orders doing the legislature's job. And it is, in my view, unconstitutional. It violates that separation of powers clause. Just like when Biden makes them on the federal level, I believe that also is unconstitutional. There have been a couple of challenges that have gone all the way to the Supreme Court. Unfortunately, they've found it to be acceptable. But that being said, that doesn't mean that you can't challenge it again. It's a lot like Roe versus Wade. It was standing law for many, many years until someone took a case all the way up to the Supreme Court. And then a new court with different values at a different time interpreted it differently and did away with that law. So I think people should challenge executive orders whenever they can. Our governor, for example, put us under a lot of pressure during the COVID crisis. we were basically locked down, and people couldn't go to church. People couldn't go to a lot of places that they needed to go. And I think that was too much power being extended by the executive.
Well, I noticed in that situation, I looked at the Arizona Revised Statutes, and I saw that there were some provisions in there that gave the governor the ultimate power to declare an emergency. Then once the emergency was declared, there was another section in the statutes that defined all these powers that are not constitutional powers. So I'm wondering, when our own revised statutes are unconstitutional, whose role is it to get that fixed?
Well, the only way that it gets challenged is if someone files a lawsuit and takes it all the way up to the Supreme Court. I know Article 4, Part 2, Section 25 of the Arizona Constitution says that in cases of emergency, the legislature is the one that's supposed to handle the emergency. And it's very clearly delineated there. There is no provision for the executive to take over and make orders like that. So since the Constitution of Arizona is the supreme law of Arizona, the ARS, the statutes that have been passed, shouldn't be able to overrule what the Constitution says. But it's up to the Supreme Court to make that determination.
Well, wouldn't the legislature be the ones to look and review and make sure the statutes line up with the Arizona Constitution? Wouldn't that be the right process?
Well, they're supposed to keep that in mind when they pass legislation. But until it gets challenged in the court, it's good law. They'll pass a law. The law goes out. We're all subject to that law. And then someone says that law isn't right. It conflicts with the Constitution. They file a lawsuit. Lawsuit goes up from the regular trial court to the Court of Appeals to the Arizona Supreme Court, and they make a decision as to whether or not a given law is constitutional. That's their job.
Okay. Well, that's interesting. I know one of the things that I worried about was the fact that we have laws or statutes that conflict with the Constitution, and where does the average person, how do we do anything? We don't have the money to hire attorneys to file lawsuits, and so who do we make our appeals to when there's something that we feel is a violation of the Constitution?
A lot of times there are organizations that help with that. The Goldwater Institute brings lawsuits when laws are unconstitutional. The Arizona Free Enterprise Club, there's several groups who are capable of financing a lawsuit and challenging bad law. It's very expensive. It's very time consuming. And until it's challenged successfully, the law stands. So it's our system doesn't really allow for the individual, unless they're very wealthy, to challenge these things and come out with a good verdict, a good result when it's all said and done.
Well, that's kind of troubling to me, and I'm sure it is to a lot of Arizonans and Americans as well, especially when we see issues like what's going on with election integrity, and we wonder, are the judges even, doing a just and right job, or are they paid for, or what's going on? It seems like the evidence is all there. How are we ever going to get back to a constitutional authority if we cannot elect people that will do the job to get things back to a constitutional form of government?
Well, you just hit on the key factor. The people have to become informed, and they can't give up and throw their hands in the air and give up, because giving up is not the right answer. We have to all be actively involved and take a role. It's our job as citizens to have a role in making sure that our elections are free and fair. The Founding Fathers had that as a basic starting point. If you don't have free and fair elections, you just don't have freedom. And so those freedoms are protected by free and fair elections. And most of us don't believe that we have a lot of election integrity. The statutes are written very poorly, and they need to be challenged. And for example, in the event that someone loses an election, it's almost impossible to get an overturned result, because the laws are written to protect the announced result of an election. They don't want too many challenges, and especially it would destroy the system if every time that they had an election, everyone filed lawsuits and tried to undermine the results. So it seems as though the statutes need to be revised, and that's one of the reasons I ran for the Senate last time. The Arizona State Senate was in order to change the election laws that I've reviewed that just don't make any sense. They need to be fixed.
Well, I know that I myself, as a registered voter and voting and active, I feel like, okay, I'm at a point, how do I make a difference? I personally have contributed to Abe Hamaday's lawsuit, and I've contributed to Kerry Lake's a few times, and I'm watching what's going on there. But then the judicial is supposed to be where we go to resolve the different issues, and we don't seem to have any remedy there. We've got some that don't even want to hear the case, don't want to research the evidence. And so how do we fix this? That's what I would like to know.
Well, one of the problems that we have is that there's a burden placed on anyone who contests an election. They're typically the loser in an election, so they file a lawsuit, and they have a burden to prove what they call causation, legal causation. And that means that, like in Kerry Lake's case, she has to be able to show definitively that she would have received 17,000 more votes in the election if the errors that they've pointed to didn't occur. So the problem with that is the second that the ballots come in for counting, the envelope goes one direction, that has the signature of whoever the ballot inside of the envelope belonged to, and the ballot goes the other way to the tabulation machines. Once those two are separated, it's impossible to identify how those people voted. So, for example, if there were 600 felons that voted, this is just a hypothetical, if 600 felons voted and you know who they are, where they lived, and you also know that those people registered to vote and cast ballots, as soon as the envelope and the ballot are separated from one another, it's absolutely impossible to say who those 600 people voted for and who they didn't vote for. So you can't prove that those people made the difference in the election. And that's an example, but the burden is on the plaintiff in any lawsuit, the person that files it, to prove by a preponderance of the evidence that it's more likely than not that they would have won but for this error. And that's a test that can't be met most of the time. Even though it's not written into the statutes, all of the judges were trained to look for that. And if it's not there, they will rule against the party that's trying to challenge the election. We saw that in President Trump's election. We saw that in Kerry Lake's election. We saw that in Abe Hamaday's election. And actually, in my election, I looked at that very carefully and realized that there was no way that I could win if I challenged. I lost by 256 votes out of 56,000 votes that were cast. But how could I prove that the errors that I knew occurred would have caused people to vote in my direction by 257 votes? I couldn't prove it, so there's no point in filing the lawsuit.
I understand. Well, we only got a couple of minutes left. Is there anything you would like to tell the people, what you're doing and what your plans are, that type of thing?
Well, first of all, I'm teaching the Arizona Constitution, and I got very interested in it, did a lot of research, and put together a 1-hour presentation. And I'm giving that presentation throughout Northern Arizona, Central Arizona. And if anyone wants me to speak to their group, they can call my scheduler. Her name is Christy McDonald. Her phone number is 928-910-3148. And she'll be happy to schedule an opportunity for me to speak to their group. That being said, I've also filed my papers to run again. So I will be running for the Arizona State Senate in the November, actually the primary is in August of 2024. It's the same cycle as the presidential election, and I'm looking forward to winning this time.
Well, sounds great. Look forward to seeing how things go. Well, we want to thank you all for joining us and hope that you'll come back again. And if you have any questions, try to contact Mr. Zipperman's scheduler and get with him and find out some more. Thank you again for visiting with us here on Prescott Talks.